Hi friends, and welcome back to No Book Left Behind. I'm your host Mark, and today I'll be finishing off my countdown of my favourite top 10 Edgar Allan Poe stories. So it's time to finish off the countdown of my top 10 Edgar Allan Poe stories. And I've already done a video where I counted down numbers 10 through to 6. And if you've not seen that before, it's just maybe you go and watch that before you watch this one. And I'll see if I can work out how to put a card up on the screen so you can link straight to it. But I'm not sure whether I'll be able to do that. We'll have to see if my technical expertise is up to the task. Now, the crucial thing about this countdown is that it's my top 10 Edgar Allan Poe stories, not the top 10 Edgar Allan Poe stories. It's just my opinion, folks. And please feel free to disagree with me in the comments below. I always love to hear from you. Now, just to recap, the top 10 that I've revealed so far, number 10 was Hop Frog. Number 9 was William Wilson. Number 8, The Murders in the Rue Morgue. Number 7, The Pitch and the Pendulum. And number 6, A Cask of Amontillado. So what can top those great stories? Well, let's find out. And at number 5 we have the real surprise of the bunch for me, because I reread 30 or so of Poe's stories in preparation for this video and making this countdown, and I thought this one probably wouldn't even make the top 10. And here it is at number 5. Now, I knew it was good, but I had no idea just how good it was. And what is it? It's the 1838 story Ligeia. A scholar recalls his first marriage to the mysterious Lady Ligeia, a black-haired beauty with a vast store of occult and esoteric knowledge. She falls seriously ill, but maintains until the end that death only has dominion due to a lack of human willpower. The scholar is devastated by her death, but in a moment of weakness marries again, this time to the Lady Rowena of Tremaine, but it's not long before she falls seriously ill as well. Personally, I think this is one of Poe's subtlest and creepiest tales. If there is a flaw with his work in general, perhaps it's the fact that he doesn't develop his characters very much, mainly because the stories are usually so brief that not much is required in that direction. But here we have the strange and enigmatic Lady Ligeia, who may be shrouded in mystery, but ironically leaps off the page as a much more fully realised character than most of Poe's protagonists. There's a wonderfully fatalistic dark romanticism to this one, which speaks truly to my sweet little gothic heart, and I must admit I found it hard to shake this one off since I've read it again. Given that it's a brief, fairly enigmatic mood piece with few plot points, it's hardly surprising that few filmmakers have tackled it. But there is a glorious exception, of course, and it involves that man Roger Corman again, and his 1964 version, The Tomb of Ligeia, which starred the wonderful Vincent Price giving an intense and fine dramatic performance with support from an excellent cast of British character actors and the wonderful Elizabeth Shepherd. It was also mostly shot on location at Castleacre Priory, which I visited as a very young child on a school trip, barely 10 years after the film was made, which kind of gives me a little bit of a personal connection to it. There were other film versions, I believe in 2002 and 2009, but to be honest, before doing research for this video, I didn't even know they existed, and neither of them are very well regarded. And at number 4, we have The Masque of the Red Death. It's a time of plague, and Prince Prospero has invited friends, lackeys and members of his court to hole up in his fabulous abbey, and leaving the rest of the countryside to the mercies of the disease. The rich nobles embark on a lavish masquerade ball full of drinking and entertainment. But come midnight, a strange and mysterious figure is seen amongst the revellers. This is a wonderfully atmospheric story where Poe whisks the reader off to this incredible bygone age and a fabulous otherworldly Gothic setting. This promotes suspension of disbelief and an acceptance of both the stylized writing and some of the weird and outlandish events that take place. To me, it feels like reading a genuine chronicle of an actual historical happening, perhaps penned by a monk working in his cell in a monastery by the light of a guttering candle. The story is also imbued with some of the most telling symbolism of Poe's work. Do you recall that last walk that Prospero takes through those succession of various different coloured chambers? Well, that takes place from east to west, in other words, from where the sun rises to the sunset. And those rooms start off blue, representing birth, and eventually reach violet, representing the twilight of life, and then black, laced with scarlet, which represents death. Although it's worth mentioning that the colours Poe uses match only with general cultural associations rather than anything too specific, it's still a very striking use of colour, and it also helps to emphasise the opulence with which Prospero has surrounded himself and how it's no defence against the inevitability of the end. There have been several film versions, but once again the only one worth talking about is the Roger Corman directed movie which starred Vincent Price in 1964. This movie looks absolutely fabulous, thanks in part to the cinematography of Nicholas Roeg, who went on to be a fine director in his own right, but also due to some wonderful costumes and set design too. The screenplay by Charles Beaumont and R. Wright Campbell is a terrific piece of adaptation, and of course you also get Vincent Price on the top of his game at his absolute best. To my mind, it's probably my favourite Poe adaptation into a movie, and the later versions that there were, well, you can forget those really. By the time we get down to number 3, it becomes really hard to separate the stories. So what finished in the bronze medal position? Well, it was The Telltale Heart. This is the confession of an unnamed man who recalls how he murdered an old man because of his obsession with the latter's pale blue eye. He recounts how he opens the door to the old man's room a little bit more every night until a light from his lantern falls on the old man's eye and he is forced to act. This is a chilling tale of obsession and murder. The unreliable narrator was not a new device in literature when Poe used it, but few had used it with such boldness. From the beginning we know our host is a man not to be trusted when he insists on his sanity and tries to prove it by detailing the eerily patient and meticulous steps he takes to facilitate this largely motiveless murder, because all he has against the old man is his evil blue eye. And that's a clear signpost to the narrator's deep-rooted paranoia and fracturing psyche. It's a very brief tale, but a masterclass of short story writing, as the events are pared down to their absolute fundamentals. There's not a superfluous word here, but neither is one wasted. And it is interesting to compare and contrast the murderer's meticulous preparations and attention to detail with Poe's own attitude towards his writing, which is eerily similar. Movie makers have tried to film the tale, of course, but it's so brief, and that means that any feature adaptation has got to really open out the story, and sadly that robs it of one of its major strengths, which is its pure simplicity. The motiveless nature of the murder is a key ingredient of the story, and obviously that puts a very large obstacle in the way of any movie maker looking to adapt it. The best version I've seen is probably the 1960 British one. It's low budget, stars Lawrence Payne, and it is marred by an extremely weak ending, but it's decent enough, and I guess it's just about worth your time. So there are only 2 stories left. So what's at number 2? Well, that's The Fall of the House of Usher. A man answers an appeal by letter from an old school friend named Roderick Usher to pay him a visit. But when he arrives, he finds that the gloomy mansion is crumbling and that Roderick and his sister Madeline are both ill with a mysterious sickness, which Roderick puts down to their tainted bloodline. Now this has one of my all-time favourite openings of a short story, as our protagonist approaches the house of Usher on horseback through a dreary tract of country on a dull, dark and soundless day. You can almost see the weary raindrops falling from the white trunks of the decayed trees, making no mark on the surface of the dark and lurid tarn. It establishes a gloomy Gothic atmosphere which never lets up, as we visit with the frail Roderick Usher, whose eyes are now so weak he can't stand bright light anymore, and his hearing so sensitive that he can't take noise of any kind. Of course, the phrase House of Usher refers to both the family and the building, and this was obviously a conscious decision on Poe's part to link the crumbling edifice with the deterioration of Roderick and his family. Poe's obsession with premature burial, which runs through quite a few of his stories, is depicted here in its most memorable form, lurid and unforgettable. It's a slow burn for sure, but it perfectly evokes a sense of dread and the supernatural without resorting to any obvious horror tropes. Quite a few filmmakers have been drawn to adapt the work, with extremely varied results. Semi-retired director Ken Russell attempted to film a version in 2002, mostly in his garage, and yes, it's 1,000 times worse than that sounds. Fortunately, we do have some good takes on the material, the obvious one being, of course, that man Roger Corman again and his star Vincent Price, with the movie that kicked off their whole Poe cycle, House of Usher in 1960. But I'm going to pick my favourite as being a much earlier version, a 1928 French silent version by the Polish filmmaker Jean Epstein. It may be a little bit dated in terms of its acting and performance, but those visuals are absolutely incredible. And what an absolute scandal that it's not available on Blu-ray yet. So finally we're here at number 1 on the list, and I have to confess that although it was difficult ordering some of these in the top 10, there was only ever going to be one winner. But before we get to that, let's have some honourable mentions of a few stories that fell just outside the top 10. And I'd like to highlight the following: The Case of M. Valdemar, Berenice, The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather, Morella, The Purloined Letter, and Metzengestein. And those ones almost made it, but not quite. And so, let's get to it. Let's get on to number 1. And of course, it's The Black Cat. This is about an unnamed man whose propensity for alcoholism and violence leads him to mutilate his beloved pet, a black cat named Pluto. Later on, he hangs the cat from a tree, and when his house burns down, the only wall that's left seems to bear a mark which depicts this horrible deed. Later on, shortly afterwards, he comes across a cat that seems identical to his long-lost Pluto, except for a white patch on its chest, so he decides to bring it home with him. For my money, this is still the most disturbing story I've ever read. It brings together some of Poe's key themes and obsessions. We get the unreliable narrator who's a self-destructive man teetering on the brink of insanity. We have Poe's fear of premature burial, addiction, paranoia, and also the manifestation of the conscience in outside form, much in the way of the doppelganger in William Wilson. It's all here, made even more telling by savage acts of violence to a docile, friendly family pet. There's an incredible amount of power and intensity in Poe's words here, and we get a real sense of mental claustrophobia as we're trapped inside this protagonist's twisted and skewed reality. He's the ultimate unreliable narrator. How much of what he sees is actually even real? Once again, Poe delivers the horror through an internal source, rather than relying on outside supernatural forces, and it's still scarier than any vampires, werewolves and monsters could ever be. Of course, as one of the most famous horror stories ever written, it's been adapted for film countless times, but it's a very brief tale again, so usually it's just an element to a larger story or even a segment in an anthology movie. Of course, there is a very famous 1934 take on the material which starred Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, but don't go looking for too much Poe there because its connection to the original story is tenuous at best. And I say that even though it's one of my all-time favourite films. So that wraps up my countdown of my top 10 favourite Edgar Allan Poe stories. Do you agree with my selections? Do you think I got a tad predictable towards the end there? I think I did, but sometimes stories are just iconic because they are such classics. Are there any of your favourite Poe stories that didn't make the top 10 and didn't get mentioned at all? I guess the gold bug might be missing in action for some. Maybe even a few of you would make a case for the colloquy of Monos and Una, although probably not. Anyway, please feel free to vent in the comments below. And if you're still here, why not throw a blood-stained axe at the like button, or even think about subscribing to the channel if you've not already done so. I'm aiming to try and get 250 subscribers by the end of the year. And I would like to take this opportunity to apologise for the slightly random nature of my posting schedule at the moment. I've got painters and decorators in repairing and restoring my house at the moment, and that is quite disruptive. But in the meantime, please don't forget to keep looking through those narrow side streets of your town to find those strange forgotten second-hand bookshops. Please don't forget to keep going to those car boot sales, visiting those market stalls and charity shops, because there are treasures out there that only you can find. Be seeing you.